The moment Elvis Presley stopped singing, nobody inside the arena understood that history had just changed forever. For years, people would remember the concert because of the music, but those who were there would later whisper about something far greater than any song. They would remember the silence. Not the applause, not the screaming, not the flashing cameras. The silence. Because that was the exact moment an old secret finally found its way home. Thousands of fans had packed every seat inside the enormous arena long before the lights dimmed. Every face carried the same anticipation. Some had traveled across the country just to hear Elvis Presley sing one more time. Young couples held hands. Children sat on their fathers' shoulders. Elderly fans smiled through tears, remembering the first time they had heard his voice many years before. The room vibrated with excitement. Spotlights danced across the crowd like waves of gold. The orchestra prepared. The band exchanged confident smiles. Then the announcer spoke only 2 words. "Ladies, Elvis!" The building exploded. The roar became almost unbearable. People screamed his name until their voices cracked. Elvis Presley walked onto the stage wearing his famous white jumpsuit, decorated with sparkling stones that reflected every beam of light. His cape flowed gently behind him while the audience welcomed him like a king returning home. He smiled. Not the rehearsed smile people saw in photographs, a genuine smile, a grateful one. He placed a hand over his heart before stepping toward the microphone. "Good evening." The crowd answered before he could continue. "We love you, Elvis!" He laughed softly. "I love you too." Music filled the arena. The opening notes echoed through every corner of the building. Almost instantly, thousands of voices joined together. It felt less like a concert and more like one enormous family singing with the man who had changed music forever. Song after song, the atmosphere grew stronger. People danced, they cried, they laughed. Some simply stood motionless, unable to believe they were finally watching the man they had admired for years. Every note seemed perfect. Every smile felt real. Every second became another unforgettable memory. Nobody, not even Elvis himself, expected the night to become something entirely different. Several songs later, while beginning another beloved classic, Elvis slowly walked toward the edge of the stage. As he often did, he looked into the audience while singing. He enjoyed seeing people's reactions. Sometimes he recognized familiar faces from previous concerts. Sometimes he noticed veterans wearing medals. Sometimes children waved homemade signs. Those little moments always reminded him why he continued performing. Then, his eyes stopped moving. His voice continued for only another few words. Then, silence. The orchestra looked confused. The musicians slowly lowered their instruments. The drummer froze. The pianist lifted his hands away from the keys. Even the backup singers stopped. Nobody had ever seen Elvis interrupt a performance like this. Not without explanation. The arena became strangely quiet. Nearly everyone assumed something had gone wrong with the sound equipment. Others thought Elvis might be feeling ill. A few people looked nervously toward backstage. But Elvis wasn't looking at the band. He wasn't looking at the audience as a whole. He was staring directly at someone. Front row, seat number 12. A young woman stood there, completely motionless. Unlike everyone else around her, she wasn't cheering. She wasn't holding a camera. She wasn't asking for an autograph. She was crying. Not quietly, not dramatically. The kind of crying a person cannot control, no matter how hard they try. Tears streamed down both cheeks while she clutched something tightly inside her coat pocket. Their eyes met. For several endless seconds, neither one moved. People followed Elvis's gaze until thousands of strangers were staring at the same young woman. She looked overwhelmed, terrified even. Security guards instinctively stepped closer, unsure whether they should intervene. Elvis gently raised one hand. No. The guard stopped immediately. He stepped away from the microphone. Without speaking to the audience, without explaining anything, he slowly climbed down from the stage. Thousands watched every step. Camera operators rushed to follow him. Television crews zoomed in. The giant screens displayed only two people now: the king of rock and roll and an ordinary young woman whose face almost nobody recognized. The silence became almost painful. When Elvis finally reached her, he didn't ask for her name. He didn't ask why she was crying. Instead, he looked into her eyes with an expression no camera had ever captured before. It wasn't curiosity. It wasn't confusion. It was recognition. As if somewhere deep inside his memory, a forgotten door had just begun to open. The woman trembled. She looked as though she wanted to speak but couldn't force the words out. Elvis carefully reached for her hand. It felt ice cold. He helped her step over the small barrier separating the audience from the walkway. Security instinctively moved closer again. Elvis quietly shook his head. It's all right. Those two words echoed through the speakers, because one nearby microphone accidentally picked them up. It's all right. He slowly escorted the young woman onto the stage. Thousands remained standing. Nobody dared interrupt. Even children seemed to understand something extraordinary was unfolding. The orchestra members exchanged nervous glances. The manager backstage whispered frantically into his headset. What is happening? Nobody had an answer. The woman stood beneath the bright lights, shielding her eyes for a brief moment. She had clearly never expected to stand before thousands of people. Her breathing became uneven. Her hands shook uncontrollably. Elvis turned toward her. Instead of handing her the microphone, he gently placed both hands upon her shoulders. He leaned closer, so close that only she could hear him. The audience watched their lips move, but heard nothing. Then Elvis whispered a single question. Did you bring it with you? The woman's entire body froze. Her eyes widened. Fresh tears rolled down her face. For several heartbreaking seconds, she couldn't even breathe. She slowly nodded. Only once, very gently. Elvis closed his eyes, almost as though he had been waiting many years for that answer. When he opened them again, there was something different in them, something older, something heavier. The audience had never seen that expression before. The woman finally whispered back, "Yes." Her voice barely existed. "I promised I would." Nobody in the arena understood what those words meant. Nobody knew what it was. Nobody understood why Elvis's hands had begun trembling. But everyone could feel one thing. This concert was no longer about music. Somewhere beneath decades of fame, beyond the bright lights, past the sold-out arenas, an old story had quietly returned. And before another song could ever begin, the greatest performance of Elvis Presley's life was about to happen without him singing a single note. The entire arena remained frozen. Not a single person spoke. Even the television cameras seemed afraid to move. Elvis Presley slowly released the young woman's shoulders, but his eyes never left hers. He searched her face as though he were trying to recognize someone he had not seen in a lifetime. "You kept your promise," he whispered. The young woman nodded through her tears. "I always knew this day would come." Nobody understood what they were talking about. Millions of people watching the live broadcast leaned closer to their television screens. Inside the arena, every heartbeat seemed louder than the silence itself. Elvis gently extended his hand. The young woman reached into the inside pocket of her coat. Her fingers trembled so badly that she struggled to remove what she had been protecting all these years. Finally, an old, yellowed envelope appeared. Its edges were worn. The paper had faded with time. It looked as though it had survived decades of careful protection. She held it with both hands as if it were the most valuable thing she owned. Then she pulled out something even smaller, a tiny silver hospital bracelet. Its color had nearly disappeared. The writing was barely visible. Yet the moment Elvis saw it, the color drained from his face. His breathing stopped. His hands began shaking. "No," he whispered. His voice cracked. "It can't be." The audience watched in complete confusion. One of the musicians quietly removed his glasses. Another lowered his head. Even the security guards forgot they were working. Everyone could feel they were witnessing something deeply personal. Elvis carefully reached toward the bracelet, but hesitated before touching it. It was almost as though he feared the memory attached to it. When his fingertips finally brushed the cold metal, a forgotten night returned with astonishing clarity. His eyes slowly closed. The bright lights of the arena disappeared. The cheering crowd vanished. The music faded away. In his mind, he was no longer standing on a stage. He was standing beneath a cold sky many years earlier. Rain poured relentlessly onto the empty streets of Memphis. It had been long after midnight. Most stores had already closed. The sidewalks were deserted. Elvis had just finished a recording session. He was exhausted. The world already knew his name, but he still remembered what it felt like to have nothing. As his car approached an old neighborhood, something caught his attention. A small child was crying, not loudly, weakly. The sound barely rose above the rain. "Stop the car," Elvis had said. His driver looked surprised. "Are you sure?" "Please." The car stopped. Elvis stepped into the storm without an umbrella. His polished shoes splashed through deep puddles. Across the street, beneath the broken roof of an abandoned bus stop, sat a young couple. They looked exhausted. The woman cradled a newborn baby beneath a thin blanket already soaked by the rain. The father tried desperately to shield them with his own jacket. Neither of them noticed Elvis approaching. They were too focused on keeping the tiny infant warm. "What happened?" Elvis asked quietly. The young father looked embarrassed. "Our car broke down. We've been trying to get to the hospital." "My wife was discharged today." "We have nowhere to go." The young mother tried to smile despite obvious exhaustion. "We'll figure something out." Elvis looked down at the newborn. The baby was unbelievably small. Wrapped inside a faded blanket, its tiny hand slipped free. Around the baby's wrist rested a hospital bracelet. Elvis stared at it for several silent seconds. the little fingers wrapped around one of his. Something inside him shifted. Without another word, Elvis reached into his coat. His wallet contained several thick bundles of cash, money meant for travel, money he had planned to use the following morning. He placed every dollar into the father's hands.
The young man immediately shook his head.
"We can't take this."
"You have to," Elvis answered. "It's too much."
"No."
Elvis smiled gently. "It's exactly enough." The young mother burst into tears. She tried to thank him. He stopped her before she could. "Promise me something." Both parents looked at him. "If this little girl grows up healthy, if she becomes kind, if one day she asks whether good people still exist, don't tell her my name." The father looked confused. "But she'll want to know." Elvis slowly shook his head. "No. Tell her only this. Someone once helped your family because it was the right thing to do. Nothing more." The father wiped away his tears. "I promise." Elvis smiled. He gently touched the baby's tiny hospital bracelet one final time. Then he quietly walked back into the rain. No photographs, no newspaper, no reporters, no applause, only falling rain. By the next morning, he'd almost convinced himself the night had never happened. Life became busier. Tours, movies, interviews, awards, more concerts than he could count. Years slowly buried that memory beneath fame. Until tonight. Until this very moment. Elvis slowly opened his eyes. The arena came back into focus. The young woman still stood before him, still holding the same bracelet, the same envelope, the same promise. "You," Elvis whispered. She smiled through tears. "My parents kept their word. They never told me your name. Not until the day they both passed away. They left me this letter and asked me to find you." The arena remained silent. No applause, no whispers, no movement. The young woman carefully placed the old envelope into Elvis Presley's trembling hands. "I think it's finally time for you to read what they wrote." Elvis looked down at the faded handwriting. His fingers tightened around the fragile paper. He recognized the writing instantly, not because he had seen it before, but because some memories never truly disappear. Slowly, very carefully, he broke the old seal. Inside waited a letter that had remained unopened for more than 20 years. And before Elvis could read the very first line, a single tear fell onto the paper. The first tear landed on the faded paper before Elvis Presley could read a single word. For a brief moment he simply stood there. The entire arena disappeared from his mind. The thousands of people, the bright lights, the cameras, the orchestra. None of it existed anymore. Only an old letter rested in his trembling hands. He took a slow breath. Very carefully, he unfolded the brittle pages that had survived more than 2 decades. The handwriting was elegant, but uneven in places, as though every sentence had been written with exhausted hands and a grateful heart. Elvis began reading silently. "My dear friend, you told us never to tell our daughter your name. You said that kindness should never expect applause. We promised you we would honor your wish, and we did. Our little girl grew up believing that one anonymous stranger changed our lives forever. Tonight, if you are reading this letter, it means our daughter finally found you. It also means that we are no longer here to thank you ourselves. Elvis stopped reading. He closed his eyes. His lips trembled. The young woman quietly lowered her head. She had never seen him cry before. Neither had most of the people inside the arena. After several long seconds, Elvis continued. The night you found us, we had nothing. No home, no money, no family willing to help us. Our daughter had been born only hours earlier. The doctors warned us that she would need medicine, warmth, and proper care if she were going to survive. We had already accepted the possibility that we might lose her. Then you arrived. You gave us more than money. You gave us hope. The next morning we rented a small apartment. A local mechanic repaired our car. I found steady work within a week. My wife opened a tiny bakery several years later. Our daughter never went hungry. She went to school. She graduated with honors. She became the first person in our family to attend college.
Every beautiful moment in our lives can be traced back to one decision you made in the rain. You probably forgot us, but we never forgot you. We prayed for you every single night. Not because you were famous, not because the world called you a legend, but because, for one terrible night, you chose to be an ordinary man with an extraordinary heart. Elvis could no longer hold back his tears. His vision blurred. He removed his glasses and wiped his eyes. Across the arena, countless people quietly did the same. Not a single cheer interrupted the silence. Even the television commentators had stopped speaking. The only sound inside the building was the quiet breathing of thousands of people sharing one unforgettable moment. Elvis turned the page. One final paragraph remained. If our daughter ever finds you, please tell her one thing. Tell her never to measure a person's greatness by their wealth, their success, or the applause they receive. Tell her greatness is measured by what someone does when nobody is watching. You taught us that lesson without saying a single word. Thank you for saving our family. Thank you for giving our daughter a future. Thank you for reminding us that miracles sometimes wear ordinary clothes. With endless gratitude, the family you rescued on a rainy night. Elvis slowly lowered the letter. He could not speak. The young woman stepped closer. My father carried that letter everywhere, she said softly. He wanted to thank you himself. He searched for years. But every time he came close, he remembered your request. So he waited. She smiled through tears. When he became sick, he called me to his bedside. He placed this letter in my hands. He told me, one day, when the time is right, find the man who gave you your life before you were old enough to remember his face. Her voice broke. I promised him I would. Elvis looked at her for a long moment. Then something remarkable happened. He placed the letter against his chest. He stepped forward, and without saying a single word, he embraced her. Not as a celebrity greeting a fan, not as a performer thanking an audience, but as one human being embracing another. The young woman buried her face against his shoulder and wept. Years of gratitude, years of searching, years of unanswered questions, all disappeared in that single embrace. Across the arena, people quietly stood from their seats. No one had asked them to. It happened naturally, one by one, then row by row, then section after section, until every person inside the building was standing. Yet nobody applauded. The silence itself became the tribute. Musicians wiped away tears. Security guards looked toward the floor, unable to hide their emotions. Camera operators struggled to keep the image steady. Many of them were crying as well. After several minutes, Elvis gently released the embrace. He walked slowly back toward the microphone. For the first time that evening, he had no prepared speech. He looked across the sea of faces before him. Some were smiling, many were crying, all were listening. He took a deep breath. "You know," he began quietly, "the world has been incredibly kind to me. It gave me music. It gave me a career I never dreamed possible. It gave me more applause than any man deserves." He paused. Then he lifted the old hospital bracelet for everyone to see. "But tonight, I was reminded of something far more important." He smiled through tears. "There are moments in life that no camera records. There are choices that never make the newspapers. There are acts of kindness that seem so small, you almost forget they ever happened." He looked toward the young woman. "I certainly did." His voice grew softer. "But kindness has a memory. It travels farther than fame. It lives longer than success. It quietly changes lives we may never see." He gently folded the letter and placed it back inside the old envelope. Then he spoke the words that would be remembered long after every song from that concert had faded into history. "Sometimes the greatest miracle isn't the one performed in front of thousands of people." He looked around the silent arena. "It's the one you create when no one is watching. When you choose compassion over convenience. When you help someone who can never repay you. When you walk into another person's storm simply because they shouldn't have to face it alone." A tear rolled down his cheek. "The world may never know. You may never receive applause. You may never hear someone say, 'Thank you.' But somewhere, someone's entire future may exist because of one decision you made with a loving heart." For several endless seconds, nobody moved. Then, slowly, one person began clapping. Another joined. Then another. Within moments, the arena erupted into the loudest standing ovation of Elvis Presley's life. Not because of a performance, not because of a song, but because every person present had just witnessed the true meaning of greatness. Elvis smiled humbly. He placed one hand over his heart. Then he quietly stepped away from the microphone. The orchestra never played another note that night. There was no encore. There was no final song. None was needed. As Elvis walked off the stage, he glanced back one last time. The young woman was still holding the tiny hospital bracelet. She smiled. He smiled back. In that silent exchange, both understood the same truth. A single act of kindness had crossed more than 20 years, survived countless miles, outlived pain and loss, and finally come home. Long after the lights inside the arena went dark, long after the audience returned to their homes, long after newspapers finished writing about the unforgettable concert, people remembered only one lesson. Legends are admired for their talent, but they are remembered forever for their humanity.